O automóvel existe há um século. Nesse período, ele mudou o mundo. Mudou também nossa maneira de viver, o lugar em que vivemos e transformou a aparência de nossas cidades. É uma invenção maravilhosa que proporciona liberdade, mas que também trouxe sofrimentos indescritíveis. 25 milhões de mortes no mundo todo. Esse número só aumenta. Levamos meio século para perceber isso. Agora, tentamos restringir o apetite insaciável que os carros têm por vidas humanas. Tentamos pôr o tigre de volta dentro da jaula. O Mercedes Classe S é um dos maiores e mais fortes carros do mundo. É também um dos mais seguros. Mas em Paris, no dia 31 de agosto de 1997, nada disso conseguiu impedir que 3 passageiros morressem no desastre de carro mais famoso de todos os tempos. Milhões de palavras foram escritas sobre os eventos que precederam e que se seguiram ao desastre. Mas com exceção da identidade das vítimas, a dura realidade era aquela que muitos de nós encaram dia a dia. Em um desastre de carro, quem sobrevive e quem morre. E por quê? Murray McKay, o maior investigador britânico de desastres de carro, está em Paris. Com informações obtidas pela polícia, ele fez a primeira reconstituição detalhada daquilo que aconteceu dentro do túnel.
According to the accident investigators, this is where the accident began. About 20 past midnight, the Mercedes is coming along this road on the left bank of the Seine towards the Alma Bridge. It heads down towards the underpass, and it's estimated at that time it speeds about 70 miles an hour. What happens next is based on the evidence that we have so far. As he comes down into the tunnel, he's faced with a slow-moving Fiat. He steers to the left. Because he's just come over a crest, the steering's light, he probably puts in too much steering, so he's heading towards the center columns. He corrects right, and now he's heading directly for the Fiat Uno.
O Mercedes abarrou o Fiat, arrancando seu próprio retrovisor e estilhaçando a lanterna traseira do Fiat. Até então, era só uma pequena colisão. Uma marca de derrapagem de 32,5 metros mostra que o motorista do Mercedes girou o volante de volta para a esquerda. O carro então subiu no acostamento e bateu de frente da pilastra número 14. O carro rodopiou e parou virado para a direção de onde viera. Deduz-se que o Fiat passou sem parar para ajudar.
Speed, a driver under the influence of alcohol, the unexpected encounter with the Fiat. These all played their part. But you must remember that from the time the car entered the tunnel until it came to rest after the impact, that's only about 2 seconds. Newspapers have talked luridly of speeds of 120 miles an hour, but looking at the damage tells a very different story. It suggests an impact with the pillar of about 60 miles an hour. And we know that the car came to rest about 15 feet from the pillar, spinning out, and that means about 10 miles an hour exit speed from the pillar. So the change in velocity was slightly less than 50 miles an hour. And it's that change in velocity which is crucial in terms of the severity of the crash to which the occupants were exposed. This was a severe but a survivable accident, and what we now need to consider is why did 3 people die? Strangely, Princess Diana, sitting where I am in the right rear, had the best chance of survival because the impact was concentrated on the left front of the car, and as it hit the pillar, it also rotated and span out, so she went partly past the pillar and didn't have quite the same crash forces applied to her as happened to the people sitting on the left. If she'd been wearing a seatbelt, she'd have had a fair chance of surviving even this extreme accident. But unbelted, she was thrown forward to strike the back of the front passenger seat, the door pillar, and then was tossed around after the main accident took place and the vehicle span out.
O túnel é um dos poucos em Paris que não tem as pilastras protegidas, apesar de estar em uma das avenidas mais movimentadas da cidade. 8 pessoas morreram aqui em 15 anos.
You know, the driver's been blamed, the paparazzi have been blamed. There's been suggestions even that Princess Diana was blamed for not wearing her seatbelt. But what is clearly obvious to me is the responsibility of the French authorities. You have a design here that's more appropriate for the horse and carriage age. If you'd spent £10 per foot on a guardrail, 3 more people would be alive today. With this tragic accident, what we're showing is we're pushing the levels of survivability with car safety. It shows how far we've come, but it also shows in the wider aspects of safety how much further we have to go.
"40 anos atrás, segurança em automóveis era a última coisa com que as pessoas se preocupavam. Nos anos 40 e 50, os Estados Unidos estavam no topo do mundo, assim como o carro americano, literalmente. Em um excesso de zelo, um propagandista ousado usou um helicóptero para levar um Chevrolet com modelo e tudo para cima de uma montanha, para mostrar que ele estava acima da concorrência.
Chevrolet.
O vento então ficou mais forte. Apavorada, a modelo não pôde ser trazida para baixo e foi deixada sozinha no meio da ventania. Disse que ela sofreu uma crise nervosa por causa do acontecido. Um processo de indenização foi evitado por pouco, mas essa foi a única mancha na idade de ouro do automóvel americano.
Here you are, 1 mini cheeseburger.
Thank you. Let me tell you about the 50s. I love the 50s. I love my friends, I love the music, and I love the cars of the 50s. To me, it was the excitement of all time. To have these beautiful, beautiful cars that I could see, that I could touch, that I could smell, that I could feel, that I could drive.
Para os americanos dos anos 50 e 60, tudo parecia possível. O país era rico e a vida era fácil.
We had that freewheeling attitude in this country. We'd go anywhere, do anything, just take on the whole country, and the cars looked like that. And I think that the shapes and forms that we were dealing with, it was probably a great expression of the way people felt, the way they dressed, the way we lived, the way we acted. I think it was a reflection of the theater and the kind of movies we saw in those days. Our whole culture, I think, was really pretty much explained with the types of automobiles we drove.
Era um sonho americano que todo mundo estava ansioso para compartilhar.
For on this magnificent road, the speed which can easily be reached is so great that senses may be numbed and judgment warped.
Na Grã-Bretanha, inauguravam suas primeiras rodovias modeladas de acordo com as estradas americanas. A novidade era tão grande que multidões se reuniam durante horas observando os carros passarem. Pela primeira vez, os motoristas britânicos puderam pisar na tábua e sentir os ventos da mudança em seus cabelos. Mas no começo, tudo era meio estranho.
If you overshoot the turning point, don't try to do this. Reversing and turning on the motorway is an offence which could cost you £20 in a magistrate's court. If you miss your turning, you must continue along the motorway to the next exit. This is also an offence. Motorways are for motoring, not for parking and picnic parties.
Após os anos de guerra, havia uma enorme demanda acumulada por carros. As pessoas estavam desesperadas por qualquer coisa sobre 4 rodas.
It was easy. Everybody wanted the product. You didn't chase the people, they chased you. Bless my soul. If a client actually asked to see what was under the bonnet, we salesmen would be horrified. They'd probably know more about it than we would.
Gosh, your new Austin Cambridge is really super duper, James. Yeah, like a ride. We're just off.
They were buying freedom. They wanted to get out. They wanted to go down to the seaside with the kids. They wanted to go and see Granny at the weekend. Safety? We knew the cars would stop. We knew they'd steer well. I can't remember ever talking to anybody about safety in the terms we do today. They certainly never asked us, thank goodness.
A totalidade do horror que acontecia nas estradas era desconhecida da maioria e apenas vislumbrada por poucos.
I began to examine the safety records in this country. I found that we were killing about 45,000 people per year in auto accidents. It's roughly the same number as were killed in total during the 13 years of the Vietnam War. And yet at the time, in the early 1950s, it was thought very little could be done about that.
Na Grã-Bretanha, assim como nos Estados Unidos, começava-se a perceber que nem tudo estava bem com o mundo.
In the late part of the 50s and the early 60s, we became aware really quite rapidly that road accidents were really a very major part of our work. And in fact, the word carnage is not too dramatic for that. It seems on some days that that's all we did. You ready?
No.
No?
Here we go.
The effect on the staff was a feeling of almost hopelessness, that nothing could be done to stop this.
The motor car knock you over?
We very soon became aware that the whole culture in this and other countries was that the car was simply too precious, and consumer groups, civil liberties groups, road organisations were very, very deeply against and very effectively against any changes that would actually reduce what was clearly carnage. And that was very distressing for us. It seemed that the car was just too important to everybody's life.
As pessoas estavam morrendo em desastres a uma velocidade de 15 km por hora. Qual seria o problema? O professor Murray McKay, da Universidade de Birmingham, montou uma das primeiras equipes de pesquisa de acidentes do mundo para descobrir a resposta. Esses ferros velhos se tornaram seu segundo lar.
I've always been interested in cars. I'm trained as a mechanical engineer. Both of my parents were doctors, so I grew up in a house where the human body and injuries was a everyday dinner table conversation, and that's how I got interested in the biomechanics of injuries. I wasn't interested in what caused the accident. I was interested in the features inside the car, designed into the car, that were killing and injuring people. And this was something that the manufacturers were really not interested in. The whole focus of the thinking at that time, traditionally, was in preventing accidents taking place, doing something about the nut behind the wheel, doing something about driving standards and education. And the idea of crash protection, crashworthiness in cars, was a totally new idea.
Nos Estados Unidos, esses mausoléus mecânicos eram visitados por outro tipo de investigador. As leis de qualidade dos produtos fizeram especialistas como Byron Block virem até aqui em busca de falhas nos desenhos dos carros, que haviam matado ou ferido seus clientes. As provas que achou seriam usadas no tribunal.
This is a 1956 Buick made by General Motors, and this is just like a car that my family owned in the 1950s. Let me show you some of the real safety hazards in this car, and this was typical of tens of millions of cars produced throughout the 1950s. First of all, the steering column is just like a harpoon. It'll ram into your chest, and to further aggravate that problem, look at the knife-like blades of the steering wheel that also will serve to cut into your chest and your neck and your face in a frontal crash. And remember, the car had no seat belts, so invariably you're going to go forward in a frontal crash, and this was lethal. Also, the ignition switch, the key that goes into that, typically would slice into a driver's kneecap, would shatter the kneecap. Very lethal. Many other knobs and protrusions in the car would also punch holes in people in frontal crashes. This padded instrument panel at least was a token recognition that safety was important, but beneath the very thin padding was a rigid metal edge, and that would do the damage. So it was a feeble effort at best. The rear view mirror is another wonderful design of the 50s. In a frontal crash, you would go forward, break the mirror, leaving a rigid metal spike rigidly attached, and it would split your skull open and you'd die. Another stupid design was the glove box door, which would pop open in a crash and serve as a guillotine, a knife-like edge that would slice into a child's neck. All of these features were found in just about all the cars of the 50s. These were secret defects, secret hazards. The public had no idea that these were killers hiding in their car.
Esses eram os homens que comandavam a maior e mais empolgante atividade industrial. A indústria que mais crescia. Eles trabalhavam para a Ford, a Chrysler e a General Motors, as maiores empresas do planeta. De seus quartéis generais corporativos em Detroit, eles dirigiam a indústria automobilística mundial. Aqui, acidentes e mortes eram assuntos proibidos que destruíam o romantismo e a mística do automóvel. E ainda ameaçavam as vendas, que estavam sempre em crescimento. Mas em 1956, um homem resolveu sair da linha. O chefe da Ford na época era o jovem e brilhante Robert McNamara. Um dia, ele recebeu a visita de cientistas da Universidade de Cornell, que estavam trabalhando na ideia de salvar vidas, embalando como ovos os ocupantes dos carros. O problema é que eles não tinham dinheiro.
They were operating on a shoestring. You won't believe this, but in carrying out their packaging experiments, they were literally dropping human skulls, packaged in different ways, down the stairwells of Cornell's student dormitories. That was their lab. The amount of money they needed might have been on the order of a few $100,000. And Ford agreed to contribute, I've forgotten what, but let's say $100,000 or $200,000. Chrysler put in a few tens of thousands. GM refused.
Impressionado com a pesquisa em Cornell, McNamara lançou os primeiros carros seguros do mercado. Não era muito pelos padrões de hoje, mas em 1956 era quase uma heresia.
Optional lifeguard padding on the instrument panel and sun visors of the 1956 Ford. Ford offers this padding because statistics show 38% of accident injuries to front seat passengers are caused by being thrown forward against hard interior surfaces. You can also have these optional nylon seat belts, 1/3 stronger than airline requirements. All these safety features add up to exclusive lifeguard design, a Ford first for safety first.
Enquanto os modelos 1956 saíam das linhas de montagem, a diretoria da Ford recebeu um telefonema. Era da General Motors, o gigante do ramo automobilístico. Um alto executivo de lá exigia que a Ford parasse com a campanha por segurança de McNamara, pois ela poderia prejudicar as vendas. Tamanha era a força da General Motors que o aviso foi interpretado com seriedade.
GM feared it would lead to a reduction in automotive sales. It sounds absurd to you. It certainly sounded absurd to me. But they believed it so strongly, they put tremendous pressure on Ford to force a reduction in our emphasis on safety. They thought it would take the romance, if you will, out of car buying. Insane.
And here is Ford's new lifeguard steering wheel. Watch what happens when these two tangle. What a wallop! But he wasn't injured because the steering wheel cushioned the shock, and his body never touched the steering post.
A campanha foi abandonada. McNamara saiu para se tornar secretário da Defesa e promover a Guerra do Vietnã. Em Detroit, a velha ordem foi restaurada. Levaria ainda quase 2 décadas até que alguém tentasse algo parecido novamente.
Depois do intervalo, o chamado carro do século, o inglês Mini, foi um fracasso diante dos concorrentes americanos e acabou recolhido. Faltava o que é mais importante num automóvel: segurança. O documentário Massacre, que abre a série Batida, volta já.
Can we make it? That's always a very important thing. And how you're going to make it? Just get down and put something on the paper, which I'm trying to do right now.
Na Grã-Bretanha, a maior mudança na história automobilística estava tomando forma.
Everything was in utmost secrecy. No one was allowed into, apart from those few who were working on it, no one's allowed into the department at all. If you try and finish drawing it, you might recognise it. It's a Mini.
O Mini chamado carro do século. Ele havia sido desenhado por Alec Exigido, o mais carismático e rabugento projetista de carros da Grã-Bretanha.
Exigido had got that many ideas so fast. It was a bit of a job to keep up with him. It was a challenge. But he always insisted on the word elegance. Style to him was a bit of an anathema, I think. A car was a functional instrument, like a hammer.
John Shepard foi encarregado de dar corpo à ideia mais ousada de Exigido, um carro com motor colocado lateralmente, com pequenas rodas que foram postas nos cantos do carro para maximizar o espaço interior. O Mini foi desenvolvido numa época de racionamento de petróleo para competir com os carros estrangeiros em forma de bolha. A imprensa esperava um veículo urbano pequeno, uma sacola de compras sobre rodas. Mas no lançamento oficial, eles se depararam com um carro de corrida.
We were watching these press people going around, very daintily they were going, and so come on, let's show them what we can do with this thing. And we took one of them each, whipped it around to the corner, back again, but 3 laps there, put the wheels back in the pound there, and walked away. As we walked away, Izzy Gones has obviously seen us do it, and he came and gave us a bollocking for it. But damage had been done. Press people were seeing what we were doing. Of course, they are going to beat us. Off they went. Right, of course. All I know is those 10 cars all needed a complete new set of tires around there. They ripped a lot off.
O Mini era mesmo revolucionário. Ele representava tudo o que havia de melhor no design britânico. Mas ele também havia herdado os defeitos dos outros carros compactos da época, chegando até a exagerá-los, por causa do seu tamanho. Certos ferimentos começaram a se repetir com frequência e a nova equipe de pesquisa de acidentes do professor McKay começou a descobrir por quê.
Supposing you have a rollover accident at night time. In this car you've got the filler neck to the fuel tank that's sticking out a long way. So in a roll it just gets sheared off. You've got free fuel coming out, you've got an electrical source, you've got a fire, you get lots of people burnt to death. And here you've got a door latch design which is just like a door latch in a house, so that if the side of the car gets stretched, the door will just swing open, people will be ejected, they'll get fatal and serious head and neck injuries from landing on the ground. You've got a seat that is just attached at the front, it hinges, nothing to hold it down at the back, so that people in the rear will come shooting forward, the people in the front will be crushed by the weight of the occupants behind. You've got a really short nose on the vehicle, so that in a frontal impact, the engine comes back, the transverse bulkhead comes back, you get really serious disabling injuries to the feet and the ankles and the lower legs from that design. So I said some fairly unpleasant things about this little car in the local press and elsewhere, and I had a summons to go to Longbridge to see Alec Isigonis, the designer of the car. And he was a dominant senior engineer at the time. He put me on the carpet in front of his desk and he said, young man, I design my cars that have got such good brakes, such good steering and handling, that if somebody gets into a crash, it's their own fault. And I thought this was a particularly stupid approach to have, and I told him in no uncertain terms what I thought, so we had a good stand-up row about it. And, of course, one of the things that happened, you know, to the Mini was that it couldn't meet the early safety standards in North America. It had to be withdrawn, and thus it was a failure because there was no market for it in the best market in the world.
Milhões foram gastos para corrigir esses primeiros problemas e garantir que o Mini correspondesse aos padrões de segurança atuais. 40 anos depois, ele se tornou um dos carros mais vendidos de todos os tempos.
The history in this case is a combination of criminal irresponsibility and innocent death.
Em 1960, o índice de acidentes estava fora de controle. Só nos Estados Unidos, a contagem de mortos já havia atingido o recorde de 50 mil ao ano.
He had no excuse. He never will have one, for his family left motherless through no fault of her own.
Revoltado por cenas como essas, um aluno da Princeton de 21 anos começou a escrever sobre segurança nos carros.
I used to hitchhike a great deal, and one time I saw a particularly gruesome crash where the head of a young child had been decapitated, and I realized that the sharp edge of the glove compartment door was the instrument.
O aluno era filho de imigrantes libaneses. Seu nome era Ralph Nader. Estas foram as palavras de abertura de sua tese de graduação.
For over half a century, the automobile has brought death, injury, and inestimable sorrow and deprivation to millions of people.
Quando um editor resolveu publicar um livro sobre segurança nas estradas, um jornalista sugeriu Nader. Sua tese de graduação se tornou Unsafe at Any Speed, um livro que devastaria a indústria automobilística. Milhões de cópias foram vendidas, trazendo fama a Nader. A indústria automobilística era Deus, ninguém jamais havia ousado criticá-la. Como Davi enfrentando Golias, Nader atacou a poderosa General Motors e um dos seus carros mais famosos, o Corvair.
The Corvair was a uniquely unstable car. It had its engine in the rear, and it had a suspension system that on cornering maneuvers induced the wheels to tuck under, as the saying was, and to destabilize it and to roll over the car. You had to be an extraordinarily skilled driver to anticipate something like this, or a very lucky driver. I thought to lead the book, Unsafe Any Speed, with the Corvair was a proper attention grabber and a proper signal that there were going to be names named, company names and make and models named.
Unsafe at Any Speed foi publicado em novembro de 1965. Em poucos dias, Nader recebeu um convite da General Motors para ir a Detroit.
I was offered a job twice by a vice president saying, why don't you come to work for GM and put your ideas to work? They were trying to feel me out, see whether I was for sale. And little did I know that at the time that they had hired a private detective to get dirt on me in order to discredit me, and several private detectives tailing me around the country. They set women to accost me and to try to get me in compromising situations. And they followed me down to the U.S. Senate office building in Washington.
Dentro do prédio do Senado, os detetives foram despistados por Nader e vasculharam os corredores com ansiedade. Por fim, eles perguntaram ao guarda se ele tinha visto Nader. O guarda, desconfiado, exigiu credenciais e descobriu o que eles faziam lá. Como Nader era testemunha de uma investigação parlamentar sobre segurança automobilística, o fato foi encarado não só como ultraje, mas também como um crime. O presidente da General Motors foi ao Senado e se desculpou com relutância.
I am not here to excuse, condone or justify in any way our investigating Mr. Nader. To the extent that General Motors bears responsibility, I want to apologize here and now to the members of this subcommittee and Mr. Nader.
Foi uma virada de mesa. O presidente Johnson assinou novas leis para controlar as montadoras. A indústria, que não errava nunca, se viu acusada de cruel desprezo pela vida humana.
Over the Labor Day weekend, 29 American servicemen died in Vietnam. During the same Labor Day weekend, 614 Americans died on our highways in automobile accidents. 29 on the battlefield, 614 on the highways. In this century, more than 1,500,000 of our fellow citizens have died on our streets and our highways. Nearly 3 times as many Americans as we've lost in all of our wars.
Teve início um conflito de 25 anos com a indústria, que até então havia dado todas as ordens. Nader havia inaugurado a era do consumidor, a revolta organizada daqueles que se sentiam impotentes frente às corporações gigantescas, que chegou ao clímax no meio da década de 70.
When I bought my Pinto, I figured it was a good value, but I didn't know how good until my dad started buying it. So I ended up buying my own.
Then I bought one, and I bought one.
And I bought one.
And we bought two.
Join the Pinto family.
This is the famous Pinto emblem that appeared in magazines and newspapers. This is the famous Pinto shape. But what made the Pinto truly infamous was the rear end. And that's where the fuel tank is located. And as you see, it is very close to the rear bumper, and in a rear impact it gets crushed against the rear axle. The tank gets punctured, ruptured, fuel gets ignited, and there are infernos that have burned up people over the years.
Dezenas de pessoas foram queimadas em acidentes com pintos, mas o caso mais famoso de todos foi o de Richard Grimshaw contra a Ford na Califórnia.
Richard Grimshaw was a young boy, and he was a passenger in a Pinto that was rear impacted, ironically enough, by another Ford. The car burst into flames, and Richard Grimshaw had his face melted, his body melted, his hands and fingers melted. It was a tragedy beyond belief.
Byron Block começou a juntar evidências para o julgamento, examinando pintos incinerados. Mas foi um documento que ele descobriu que viria a ser a prova mais eloquente. Uma carta da Ford estabelecia que nada deveria ser feito a respeito do problema com o tanque de combustível. O documento estimava que 180 pessoas provavelmente morreriam queimadas e outras 180 sofreriam ferimentos sérios, o que custaria à companhia quase 50 milhões de dólares em indenizações. Mas o custo da reparação dos carros, $11 por unidade, poderia chegar a 137 milhões de dólares.
Therefore, Ford argued, it was cheaper to let them burn. And it was that corporate attitude that convinced the jury to award $125 million in punitive damages as punishment to Ford Motor Company for that attitude of trading off human lives for a few dollars of profit.
O caso Pinto se tornou um divisor de águas ao expor o cinismo da indústria automobilística. A advertência foi recebida por todos os fabricantes de carros do mundo. Daquele momento em diante, a segurança não poderia ser ignorada.
A seguir, o piloto que em 1954 testou o limite da resistência humana num carro a 1.015 km por hora e que parou em pouco mais de 1 segundo. Os equipamentos de segurança provaram salvar vidas e você vai descobrir por que são negligenciados até hoje. Aguarde a parte final do documentário Massacre, que abre a série Batida.
Quando a busca pela segurança nos automóveis começou, ninguém tinha uma ideia clara de como fazê-lo. Pouco se sabia sobre os efeitos de um impacto no corpo humano, sobre o quanto o motorista poderia aguentar. Para descobrir isso, uma experiência aparentemente insana foi realizada no deserto do Novo México pela Força Aérea Americana em 1954. O cientista John Stepp foi amarrado a um foguete que corria sobre trilhos, para ir aonde nenhum homem havia estado antes.
He started the countdown. 10, 9. Adrenaline comes in and the heart begins to beat a little faster. Then, just as he reaches 0, you get this enormous ram against your back and feel totally helpless. You're being given the biggest kick that could be delivered.
John Stepp foi projetado a uma velocidade de 1.015 km por hora e parou em 1,4 segundo. Ninguém jamais passou por um teste assim, nem antes, nem depois.
I couldn't see anything, and I was looking around, and I was beginning to think about seeing-eye dogs and white canes. And I was thinking to myself, Now I've paid my dues. I've gotten there. I've shown them what they want to know. And from now on, life is going to be good.
John Steppe havia testado os limites da resistência humana e mostrado que, adequadamente seguro, um motorista poderia sobreviver a forças quase inimagináveis. A 10 mil quilômetros dali, engenheiros suecos começavam a trabalhar com um ovo e chegaram à mesma resposta. O cinto de segurança de 3 pontos, introduzido pela Volvo em 1959. A Volvo patenteou o cinto, mas permitiu que qualquer um utilizasse sem cobrar nada.
Inside the car, without belts, we all tumbled about like popcorn.
Os primeiros cintos de segurança foram acompanhados por uma vasta campanha publicitária. Os anúncios eram assustadores, os desastres espetaculares, mas de nada adiantaram.
Really, almost nobody I know wears seatbelts. That's the truth.
I find it inconvenient.
I don't see where you need them, really, to drive carefully.
I don't like to feel so tied down.
Mostly they're pain in the neck.
O horror nas estradas não foi interrompido. Em 1967, o governo britânico aprovou um decreto que tornava obrigatório o uso de cintos de segurança. Houve revolta e teve início uma disputa de 16 anos, a maior questão de segurança do século XX. Muitas pessoas sentiram que seus direitos estavam sendo violados.
Any intrusion into civil liberties was not going to be condoned by the people. These were things to be guarded. Perhaps in those early days there was a feeling of, damn you, I'll go to the devil my own way. I am master of my own destiny. If I don't want to wear a seatbelt and get flung out of my car and killed, that's my responsibility.
Go on blowing, sister.
A imensa campanha publicitária não teve resultados. Os desastres continuaram a acontecer, sem sinal de que parariam. Por 9 vezes, a lei foi submetida ao parlamento. Por 9 vezes, ela foi descartada. Nas salas de emergência dos hospitais, a situação era sombria.
I can well remember a young child who travelled in the front seat of a parent's car early one evening to go and buy something for supper, the English dish of fish and chips, and there was a collision, local street, low traffic speed and so forth, but a collision sufficient to throw her through the windscreen of that car because seatbelts were not in vogue in those days. She was brought here, had instantly lost the sight of both eyes, and it was unsavable. The trauma for that child was huge, and it would affect her for the whole of her life.
Os motoristas da Grã-Bretanha achavam que alguém estava tomando liberdades, e esse alguém era uma mulher.
To have a woman come along and tell them they must wear a seatbelt was intolerable. I used to get angry, almost life-threatening letters from indignant men who deeply resented having a woman Minister of Transport, particularly as that woman did not drive herself. They were having a love affair with their cars, weren't they? And the bigger and more beautiful, the better.
This was the new great release, the great opportunity, the great purchase that young men were going to make. They wanted to be free. They didn't want a lot of rules and regulations. It was certainly not proposed by a woman, that's for sure. Barbara Castle, damn it, a woman impinging upon the motor car and the motor car business. Oh dear, that wasn't a good thing.
No final, crianças foram a resposta. Ninguém resistia a cenas como esta, mostrando crianças feridas e sofrendo. Então, quando propuseram uma lei que obrigasse as crianças a usarem cintos, mesmo os mais ferrenhos oposicionistas não conseguiram dizer não. Quando foi provado que o cinto de segurança salvava vidas, a oposição ruiu. Em 1983, o uso do cinto de segurança se tornou obrigatório para todos na Grã-Bretanha. Imediatamente após, as mortes nas estradas foram reduzidas em 1/4. Era o equipamento de segurança mais eficaz já inventado.
Nag yourself to remember this drill. Clunk the car door and click the seatbelt. Clunk, click every trip.
Os britânicos haviam sido convencidos, mas os americanos eram uma conquista muito mais difícil. Apenas 1 em cada 20 usava cinto de segurança. Milhões foram gastos na tentativa de convencê-los, mas o resultado foi nulo.
What's the first thing that goes through your mind in the head-on if you're not wearing a safety belt?
The steering wheel. All in favor of wearing safety belts, raise your hand.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
Mas então, miraculosamente, o problema foi resolvido. Para os americanos, era a panaceia definitiva. Não mais importaria se o motorista estivesse usando o cinto de segurança ou não. O airbag o salvaria de qualquer forma. Nos primeiros testes, pensou-se em adaptar a nova e maravilhosa bolsa aos para-choques frontais dos carros e até em aviões. Não parecia haver limites para os lugares onde pôr os airbags. Mas no começo dos anos 70, o primeiro fabricante de carros estava pronto.
This is a 1973 Chevrolet. It's the world's first production airbag car made by General Motors. It has an airbag for the driver and an airbag for the right front passenger as well. If we had these kind of airbags all these years, this last quarter of a century, all of the cars you see around us in this wrecking yard, most of those drivers and passengers in the front seat would have walked away instead of being killed or horribly injured.
Mas a Chevrolet abandonou seus airbags 1 ano depois, alegando que seus clientes não o queriam. Quando o governo americano propôs tornar os airbags obrigatórios, a indústria lutou com unhas e dentes. Seria a última grande disputa por segurança do século XX. Os fabricantes de carros eram liderados pela gigantesca personalidade de Lee Iacocca, o chefe da Ford. Iacocca chegou a ir à Casa Branca para atacar o governo, dizendo: os airbags estão matando nossos lucros. Ele os convenceu a adiar a votação da lei. Quando Iacocca foi para a Chrysler, ele continuou sua luta de lá.
We're not doing anything on airbags because we don't believe in them. I haven't believed in them for 2 decades because of all the problems.
Mas Iacocca teria o tapete tirado debaixo de seus pés. Em 1984, pressionada por Ralph Nader, a agência responsável pela compra de todos os veículos do governo exigiu airbags. Para a surpresa geral, a Ford mudou sua postura, disputou o contrato e começou a instalar airbags tão rápido quanto possível. Iacocca ficou numa situação delicada com essa decisão, mas não por muito tempo.
Ford, GM and Honda won't have airbags in all their cars until 1994. By that time, approximately 60,000 airbags will have deployed in Chrysler-built vehicles.
A Chrysler instalaria mais airbags em menos tempo do que todos os seus concorrentes.
I couldn't believe it. This car started coming right at me. I stood on the brakes and bam!
Os airbags, de repente, se tornaram uma proposta comercial. E Iacocca era seu fã número 1.
Saved your life. Chrysler puts an airbag in every car we build in the U.S. Japanese automakers don't. An airbag can make a real difference. Right, Ron? That's right.
Com a derrota do maior inimigo dos airbags entre a indústria automobilística, a guerra terminou. Em 1990, todos os fabricantes tentavam instalar o máximo de airbags possível. Mas os problemas que todos conheciam desde a década de 70 não tinham ido embora. Kyle Lehman, de 6 anos, sua mãe, fez esse vídeo no seu último dia do jardim de infância. Ele agora é personagem central de uma das questões de segurança mais controversas que os americanos enfrentam.
We were leaving the house to go to swim lessons, and Kyle was strapped in the front seat, and Cody was in the back in his car seat. We took a gravel road, and going around the curve, we hit head-on with another vehicle, and the airbags inflated. I just remember the real loud sound in my head, feeling funny, and the smell, and it was quiet, and I got Cody out of the car, because after I got out, Cody was crying, and I got him out of the car, and then it was quiet, and all I remember is Kyle from the neck up, the mark on his neck. And he was dead. I just remember my baby being dead.
É uma tragédia americana. Enquanto agora todos os europeus usam cinto de segurança, 1/3 dos americanos ainda se recusa a fazer o mesmo. Por isso, seus airbags precisam ser fortes o bastante para proteger um adulto sem cinto. A velocidade de expansão de um airbag americano pode chegar a 340 km por hora. Uma criança que esteja inclinada para frente, mexendo no rádio ou sentada na beira do assento, como as crianças frequentemente fazem, corre perigo mortal. Até hoje, os airbags já mataram cerca de 60 americanos, a maioria crianças. Mas essa tragédia tende a esconder o fato de que na década de 90 algo notável aconteceu. A hora para a discussão da segurança havia chegado.
What trials life will throw at you. So for your protection, every Corsa has a rigid steel safety cell.
Volvo's technologically advanced side impact protection system.
Crumple zones, front and rear, and twin side impact bars in all doors.
O lema agora é: segurança vende.
The Volvo 340, tested by dummies, driven by the intelligent.
Bilhões já foram gastos. Todas as empresas fabricantes de carros têm agora seu próprio departamento de segurança, que disputa em importância com a engenharia e o design. É um estranho ramo de altíssima tecnologia, em que agora os carros colidem sem nenhum arranhão. Um Renault encontra um bloco de concreto descuidadamente posicionado.
We've seen a real sea change in terms of the acceptance of crash performance and safety design by the manufacturers. And this has come about, I think, because people are a lot more aware of it. They want to be protected and they're willing to pay for it. Safety now sells cars. So it's here to stay. And in the future, we're going to see a tremendous amount of better safety coming into vehicles.
Progredimos muito em 30 anos. Nossos carros hoje são muito mais seguros. Contudo, essa é uma história bem sucedida, mas sem final feliz. Apesar do fato de que hoje é mais difícil se matar do que jamais foi, mais pessoas o fazem. O índice de mortes por acidentes mais uma vez volta a subir. Há fortes evidências de que quanto mais os engenheiros se esforçam para tornar as estradas mais seguras, mais perigosamente nós dirigimos. Consertamos o carro, mas será que um dia consertaremos os motoristas?